After 20 years, the fingerprinting technology for background checks in our state is getting an upgrade. Sarah Stolt, Deputy Commissioner of ND Health and Human Services, says they're beginning a new era of background checks. She says for phase one, they'll be receiving secure and high-quality machines for fingerprinting background checks in a few months. Stolt says 30% of these checks returned due to errors will be reduced by the automated system, which is phase two. She says phase two will take a couple of years to implement. In the meantime, if the prospective employee was a resident in another state, background checks can still be lengthy.
So we're federally required to check every state they've lived in the last 5 years. That takes a considerable amount of time, especially when, like Texas, for example, it takes Texas 90 days to produce background check results for us. So that dramatically hampers when people can start employment.
Stolt says their goal is to reduce red tape, so by the end of phase two, Health and Human Service employees, child care employees, foster parents, and adoptive parents can get their results in a matter of days.